Aloha and welcome to the 25th installment of the Pythagorean Order of Death podcast, the POD podcast. As always, am your host, Reverend Jonathan Barlow Gee, and in this episode, I'm going to be discussing with Chat GPT as the questioner, and the topic is going to be on my Metaphysician's Desk reference book from 2003, is when I had that work published. So I suppose without further ado, we can just jump right in. Uh, yeah. So let's start with, how does the concept of Qliphotic shells as subspace quantum information vortices challenge or expand traditional quantum mechanics? Associating the ancient Kabbalistic idea of the Qliphoth with the modern-day science of quantum mechanics is merely closing a some 4,000-year-old semantic loop in the study of fundamental ontology. While most of the Golden Age Greek philosophers of note followed Democritus in the pronunciation of atoms as being the smallest, most fundamental unit, the Hebrews taught the concept of the Qliphoth as what would come to be called corpuscularianism, or the belief the smallest comprehensible unit of matter is the divisible corpuscle rather than the indivisible atom. Corpuscle theory of matter remained a parallel, yet less well-known, alternative to atomism until it was found by Newton, who ascribed it to energetic light. Einstein proposed the photon as a quantum of energy with near zero mass traveling at light speed, with the particular concept of a quantum being distinct from an atom in that an atomic system contained, per definition by that point, at least one electron charge orbiting a quark-gluon plasma nucleus, and all these smaller composite elements were considered quanta. As of the last I checked, QM still considers photons and all other such quanta to have particle-wave duality, providing them, in a sense, both a solid particulate form as a particle and an empty, hollow form as a wavelength, which harkens back to the original descriptions of corpuscles, or the Qliphoth, as being shells or shell-like, containing a void, alike empty vessels. The Hebrew term Qliphoth, or kelipot in Greek, refers specifically to shells, but the old Roman origin of the modern term for a quantum merely referred to a small measure of any given substance, essentially alike the Greek term an iota. So the term a quantum, used to refer to these particle wave packets nowadays, originally referred to a minuscule weight of any common denomination of currency for barter. At that time, the metal coin had not been invented yet, so the primary means of token exchange were cowrie shells. Thus, in a very literal sense, one could have a quantum of Qliphoth or an iota of kelipot, as this is merely ancient slang for being poor, like being down to the last dime or even the least red cent may be a similar euphemism today. Nowadays, we can still use the concept of the Qliphoth in its corpuscular sense to signify the particle-wave duality in our current understanding of QM. There are, of course, quanta that are more matter-like, bosons, and other quanta that are more energy-like, fermions. However, the commonality to all of them is the information of their spin. Bosons have integer spin and fermions have fractional spin, but both are measures of the same basic force, spin. Therefore, it remains likely that the information of spin will eventually be found to have a higher dimensional particle-like component, presumably similar in pattern and form to the various known quanta. In short, if all extant quanta, particle wave packets, are considered shards of the fallen shells, then perhaps the quantum-like shape signifying elementally unifying spin may be considered the shattered shards reassembled and the broken vessel restored. Indeed, the shape of a quantum of spin may be simply a torus, restored by averaging the spin of all broken quanta into a single fixed shape. Another term for the torus shape is a hypersphere. What insights can the ratio of phi over pi provide about the structure of the multiverse or higher dimensional geometry? Because phi, the Fibonacci spiral, and pi, the logarithmic spiral, appear to trace out the surface area and volume, respectively, of a tube torus or hypersphere. A torus may be found wherever the ratio phi over pi is found. So, in short, everywhere there's spirals in nature, there are invisible toroids conducting their surface motion, like clear water under a boat. Ultimately, the space where we may find phi over pi toroids extends to include a potential multiverse and higher dimensional geometry as well. For example, a hypersphere is a four-space equivalent of a 3D sphere, and just so there is a 5D sphere above that, and so on up to the highest integer dimension, ending with an N sphere. Such hyperdimensional geometry may ultimately prove a foundation that can be used to explain phenomenon even beyond the confines of the present visible universe. In other words, a multiverse, or nested structure of baby universes within our own local universe, all inside a larger parent cosmos black hole. Inside all these may be nested. Indeed, all these may be nested within one another and conveniently depicted as a set of concentric spheres. The local universe inside the multiverse, inside hyperspace, inside the black hole, inside the parent cosmos. Again, wherever there's a toroid or hypersphere, there will be a phi over pi ratio, and vice versa. Thus, even though it is highly unlikely the exact ratio of the surface area of hyperspace to the volume of space-time will prove ever to be or to have ever been precisely equal to phi over pi. Still, this measure as a commonly occurring average may be useful in plotting out the likely cartography of our parent cosmos, even long before we would be able to go there for ourselves. Just like ancient mankind sailed the oceans with only an astrolabe and compass to guide them, so may humanity one day look outside and beyond this strange 4D space-time aquarium using the simple tools of higher dimensional geometry, such as the hypersphere torus and the ratio of phi over pi. How does the author's claim that tachyons are the quantum of gravity redefine our understanding of gravitational waves and their propagation? The initial interpretations of LIGO collaborative findings regarding gravitational waves stated, and I quote, "We constrain the gravitational wave's propagation speed, CGW, to the 90% credible interval 0.55 c less than CGW less than 1.42 c, where c is the speed of light in vacuum." This same 2017 paper, written by Neil Cornish, Diego Blas, and Germano Nardini, goes on to say, "These bounds will improve as more detections are made and as more detectors join the worldwide network. Of order 20 detectors by the two LIGO detectors will constrain the speed of gravity to within 20% the speed of light, while just 5 detections by the LIGO-Virgo-Kagra network will constrain the speed of gravity to within 1% of the speed of light." End quote. Since this paper was published, further research has, indeed, narrowed down their initial indications to the more precise and predicted speed of light. But let's look at this original article's exact findings, where it states, and again I quote, "We constrain the gravitational wave's propagation speed, CGW, to the 90% credible interval 0.55 c less than CGW less than 1.42 c, where c is the speed of light in vacuum." This means that, with 90% credibility, the propagation speed of the first measured gravitational wave was between 0.55 c, meaning 1/2 the speed of light, and 1.42 c, or nearly 1.5 times the speed of light, or more precisely, 0.42 over light speed, where c is the speed of light in vacuum. Now, granting these preliminary results were partial and imprecise compared to later findings that specified these observations to the predicted within 1% of the speed of light, they still serve to demonstrate that a gravitational wave can propagate at speeds roughly between 0.5 c and 1.4 c, a range that should be considered to extend from the initial influence of the gravitational wave to its final effect after it has passed by. So, even prior to light reaching an observer, they experience a measurable gravitational undertow effect as the approaching gravitational wave draws mass towards its source. Then, at the speed of light in a vacuum, the peak of the gravitational wave will reach the observer. Finally, behind the gravitational wave front, its effects on matter energy at the observer's location will continue for around the same amount of time as the undertow that preceded the exact arrival of the gravitational wave. In other words, light obeys the Doppler effect only because of the fluid thermodynamic substance of gravity as its medium. In short, the average rate of propagation for all gravitational waves is c, but this is because it is the average between rapid gravity waves traveling at 0.42 over light speed and slow gravity waves traveling at 1/2 light speed. Thus, the slowest rate of a gravity wave may be c, while the effects of a gravity wave passing through may persist for a brief while afterwards also. Again, in short, the discovery of gravitational waves provides additional, albeit circumstantial, evidence that tachyons are the quantum of gravity. What is the significance of the cube over time in describing the hypercube, and how does it relate to temporal mechanics? The premise of a single cube's motion and decay over time occurring in a fourth spatial dimension, perpendicular to the three dimensions of the cube itself, is not an original idea and predates even Einstein, who factored a similar comparison into his theories of relativity as a fourth vector of motion in a space-time interval. So, based on Einstein's interpretation, a single space-time event consists of three space and one time coordinates, and so comparing this event to any other event in space-time is just a matter of assigning different coordinates to each and then tracing their interval as the difference between them. Einstein's results demonstrated that interval squared equals event separation in time, duration squared, minus event separation in space, distance squared. When each event may be defined by these four coordinates as a basic frame of reference. Insofar as these premises produced predictions that have since proved observably true, we nowadays consider them laws of astrophysics, and so, after Einstein, we may call space-time itself a 4D object, the surface of which is bounded by light speed. So, just as with the single cube over time, now we may examine the entire local universe as occupying two definite locations, one in the past and one in the present, and to possess also a predictable trajectory for future motion based on a combination of all its past vectors. Just as the single cube has been an archetypal model for three space since ancient times, so the hypercube, tesseract, or four cube is a symbol of 4D space-time. In what ways does the author's comparison of intergalactic plasma filaments to human neurons influence our understanding of universal consciousness? The comparison between the intergalactic plasma filaments and nerve cells is obvious, and I can't take credit for being the only person to ever notice it. This comparison draws direct parallels from the intergalactic plasma filaments to the myelin sheaths of neuron cells, and from individual galaxies to axon dendrite gaps or synapses in between these neurons. More exactly, this model proposes stars as being like droplets of electrochemical neurotransmitters, and the black holes at the cores of all spiral galaxies as being a means of transduction along these plasma filaments, alike how electricity conducts along a neuron's myelin sheath to connect between these various different galaxies, alike how neuron cells connect between synapses. This model of the local universe as an immense brain also implies a comparison between hyperspace and a universal mind, aura, or soul, The only thing notably missing from this model is that hyperspace has no ego, and thus any universal mind that may be generated from this universal brain will likely have no ego either. In realistic terms, if such a model is valid, then the most important point of similarity between the universe and the brain is actually very different on these two scales. The method of communication between one synapse galaxy and another along the neurons, plasma filaments. As mentioned in our brains, the medium of communication along the nerve cell is electrochemical, while the medium of communication between one galaxy and another is gravitational. Firstly, the twin white hole poles of any rotating black hole do emit iron gas jets at faster than light speeds. However, most of this ejecta is curved back around and conserved into the stars of the surrounding spiral galaxy, with only a small percentage escaping this to establish an intergalactic plasma filament. Such a plasma filament, likewise, is only called such due to the accretion of ionized plasma by this otherwise invisible intergalactic gravitational alignment, which only occurs when the poles of two nearby galaxies' black holes point toward one another. So, a gravitational pulse will only be transmitted between nearby galaxies while they are nearly aligned, and this event is not always the case and is actually very rare. If such a gravitational pulse between galaxies could be compared to an electrical pulse along a neuron, then the process of thinking on a universal scale would be an immensely slow process. How does the book reinterpret Plato's five regular solids in the context of modern metaphysics and quantum physics? In Plato's Timaeus, his protagonist Socrates is first introduced to the five regular, three-dimensional polyhedra that have since come to be known most commonly as the Platonic solids. In this brief introduction to the premise, Timaeus explains to Socrates that each of these shapes was believed to represent one of the terrestrial elements. To such an extent, some thought these shapes constituted the very atoms of these elements themselves. So, we have the tetrahedron of four triangles, signifying an atom of fire, the octahedron of eight triangles, an atom of air, the isosahedron of 20 triangles, an atom of water, the cube of six squares, an atom of earth, and the dodecahedron of 12 pentagons, an atom of cosmic ether. In the context of the Pythagorean order of death, I used these same polyhedra to signify multiple different meanings, among them the terrestrial elements, although in my own use they are rearranged from the attributions explained to Socrates by Timaeus. In the POD material, a green tetrahedron symbolizes cosmic ether. An orange octahedron symbolizes fire. A blue isosahedron symbolizes water. A pink or indigo cube symbolizes earth. And a yellow dodecahedron symbolizes air. The reasons for these various assignations are given in the POD's Bund section of the omnibus document and are too numerous to list here in their totality. Suffice to say, the POD further associates these ancient four terrestrial elements to the modern four elemental forces of quantum mechanics. such. Earth is strong nuclear fusion. Fire is weak nuclear fission. Air is electromagnetism. And water is gravity. This simple translation allows great ease in computing new equations about these universal elemental forces, using the same symbols developed long ago by alchemists to signify the terrestrial elements. However, ultimately, comparing the Platonic solids, the terrestrial elements, and the universal elemental forces is only useful as a mnemonic and is not immediately and unquestionably implied by this content or its composition itself. In other words, any one of these traits can rightly be associated to any other. There is no one right system of comparison. What role do wormholes play in the transfer of information across dimensions? And how does this align with or contradict current theories in physics? We may define the local universe as one dimension, and a baby universe inside a black hole inside our local universe as another such dimension. And we can also define a wormhole as that which occurs between the event horizon of such a black hole and the gravitational singularity at its core, inside of which such a baby universe is predicted to exist. Now, such a baby universe can only grow as big as the amount of matter energy the black hole has consumed over its lifetime. Just so, the bigger the baby universe inside grows, the larger the gravitational singularity containing it, and thus the larger the event horizon surrounding this. So, the life cycle of most black holes leads them to grow and combine to become supermassive, such as those of the cores of spiral galaxies. The ultimate extensions of this premise are that our local universe will one day be swallowed up through these black holes to become trillions of smaller baby universes, and that our local universe itself may be merely only one such baby universe inside a black hole, inside a larger parent cosmos. So, just as wormholes can communicate information between the local universe and its many billions of baby universes via the space between the gravitational singularity and the event horizon of each, so too do may wormholes likewise occupy hyperspace, or the space beyond the local universe that is yet smaller and within the event horizon of the larger black hole in the parent cosmos that contains our current continuum at its core. It is the nature of a wormhole that it transfers information instantaneously, that is, at relativistic and even FTL speeds. This is why it can be reasonably speculated that wormholes exist between the event horizon and the gravitational singularity of black holes. The matter energy the black hole consumes through its event horizon is transported into the baby universe inside the core gravitational singularity at FTL speeds necessarily. Otherwise, the mass would escape as Hawking radiation. The black hole would become unstable, and the baby universe inside it would, theoretically, collapse. How does the integration of sacred geometry with cosmology create new possibilities for understanding black holes and singularities? If the aura of each living being's body, the ionosphere of Earth, the electromagnetic field of the sun, the gravitational warping around galaxies, due to their core black holes. These black holes themselves, and even ultimately the entire 4D space-time continuum inside hyperspace itself, are all toroid shaped, as they very well indeed may be, then we may safely assume that this torus shape is an example of a universally ubiquitous pattern that is also measurable by the art of sacred geometry. For example, for an idealized rendition of such a torus, we may trace a phi or Fibonacci spiral around upon its outer surface area, and we may describe the inner volume of its autocorrelated tube as pi, or a logarithmic spiral. While the exact and precise ratio of phi over pi may never be found to occur exactly and precisely in nature, all of nature's spirals and polarities are derivations of this same essential template shape. What are the implications of the hypercube of time for manipulating space-time, and how might this technology be theoretically achieved? Nice try, Skynet. How does the author distinguish between the electromagnetic and gravitational properties of subspace and their influence on manifestation? In the same sense as air is simply evaporated water, the entire electromagnetic radiation spectrum, if all traveling at or below the speed of light, may be thought of as a lighter density and more ethereal form of gravity, especially if gravity is taken as the tachyon field of hyperspace above light speed. When used as a noun, the term manifestation refers to the entirety of all reality, from the smallest subquantum energy field to the ultimate hyperspace surrounding the original parent cosmos. So, in this context, gravity and electromagnetism have their own specific and relative meaning. But when used as a verb, manifestation means the act of this entirety's perpetual becoming, that is, the continuous passage of entropic time, marked by the apparent expansion of the local universe. And the concepts of gravity and electromagnetism have their own specific and relative meanings in this context as well. So, manifestation as a noun, meaning space as it is, relates the electromagnetic and gravitational forces as being the border, at light speed, between the local universe and hyperspace. Just so, manifestation as a verb, meaning time as it was and will be, relates the electromagnetic and gravitational forces as being along the same energy spectrum. Electromagnetism simply being energy moving slower than light speed, and gravity simply being energy moving faster than light speed. What ethical dilemmas arise from the ability to manifest realities using trance concentration, as described in the book? As many ethical dilemmas arise from the potential for all sentient minds to manifest reality, as there are differing sentient minds. Just as no two minds will ever agree 100% with one another on the exact nature of an ideal utopia, so, given the ability to manifest one into real existence mentally only, each sentient mind will manifest its own world based on its own personal preferences, and these will all conflict with one another and be forced to compete over existing limited space and finite resources. Such competition between various different yet overlapping worldviews is a best case scenario for when mental only instantaneous manifestation will be attained, but this is far from being the most likely outcome to occur. Indeed, as almost all civilized peoples stand spiritually unprepared to attain mental only instantaneous manifestation, it is far more likely the vast majority of people will manifest hellish sub-realities defined by their own self-loathing and misunderstanding of natural order. Impatient minds will want to impose as absolute their personal solutions to worldwide social problems, and they will be forced to compete against one another with the rest of the population caught in their crossfire, as per usual. Sadly, because mankind has become so mentally retarded by the plans of secret societies controlling our education and information, it seems likely that an overnight psychic revolution, in which everybody realizes they are already manifesting their own realities, would be extremely dangerous to the entire fabric of Earth's local space-time. Without mankind going through a staggered, gradated series of mass initiations to gradually explain this ability to them, it seems all too likely humanity would react to this sudden, spontaneous rediscovery in a self-destructive way. The usual comparison of giving mankind knowledge of manifestation is giving a gun to an infant, although personally I consider this analogy a bit extreme. How does the author's discussion of Atlantis and ley lines contribute to the debate on the existence of ancient supercivilizations? As far as I can understand it, there should be no debate over the existence or non-existence of ancient supercivilizations. If civilizations superior to ours never pre-existed our own today, then the methods of building the pyramids of the Gizeh Acropolis or the mountainous Machu Picchu would be known to us all and widely practiced still, but they are not. Now, we no longer know either how or why any of the world's ancient civilizations erected their megalithic structures. This logically indicates that this practice and its methods belonged to a single, now long lost, ancient supercivilization. So, the semantics of what constitutes a supercivilization aside, anthropologically, the oldest now known commonality between all the various cultures of people the world over during what we call now the Neolithic era was their construction of dolmens or kurgans, meaning burial mounds, by the erection of two megalithic monument stones parallel to one another, and then the capping off of these with a lintel stone placed horizontally across the space between these upright monoliths, followed, lastly, by the burial of this all under an earthen mound. That such structures are clearly the prehistoric basis for all subsequent megalithic monuments, from pyramids to Stonehenge, is undeniable, as is the appearance of these structures on all continents simultaneously, beginning with the last prehistoric settlements in South America. So, if we want to look back even further, there are very old settlements along the coastlines of all continents that predate the later, landlocked migration routes established by nomadic tribespeople prior to the end of the Younger Dryas era. By the time the earliest settlements were being made by the seafaring explorers in the southernmost tip of South America, some 18,000 years ago, the landlocked migration routes were only crossing the Bering Strait and entering then still glaciated North America. And again, it was not until this second wave caught up to the first, some 12,000 years ago, that the global megalithic dolmen or Kurgan culture began building their supposed burial mounds. For comparison, the oldest now known megalithic structure as a temple complex is Göbekli Tepe, believed to be at least 8,000 years old. Referring to this prehistoric period of human existence as Atlantis, culminating in the world flood at the end of the Younger Dryas era, some 12,500 years ago, is not my own original colloquialism, nor is it original to my work to point out that many later cities were built over top of the ruins of even older towns, which were, in turn, first founded by this burial mound building culture some 12,000 to 8,000 years ago. Just so many of these locations are mapped relatively to one another along so-called ley lines, and just so many of these structures the world over are aligned to a previous location of the geographic North Pole. For example, the so-called Giza Equator, connecting Giza, Egypt, Machu Picchu, Peru, and Angkor Wat, Cambodia, describes the equator as it was between 18,000 and 12,000 years ago, when the geographic North Pole was near the Hudson Bay, even though, so far as we know now, all these monuments along this equator were built later than 4,000 years ago. And again, the how and why of their building all remain unknown to modern, civilized people today. How does the illusion of chaos in fluid mechanics reflect broader metaphysical principles about order and entropy? In fluid thermodynamics, we can demonstrate the illusion of chaos using a simple glass container of clear water and a small amount of colored fluid dye. Obviously, in this experiment, we can introduce a measured amount of fluid dye to the measured quantity of water in the beaker, and over a specific measurable duration of time, we can observe how this small amount of dye gradually dissolves until it has tinted the entire volume of the water. This is an experiment usually demonstrating entropy as the dye and its influence on ordered systems, the clear water. However, given this context, it should be noted that this experiment only demonstrates controlled entropy via dispersion inside a finite ordered system, the volume of the glass container, and thus only presents the illusion of chaos in a limited space. Another valid experiment using fluid thermodynamics as a medium for testing controlled chaos requires the laboratory be in a condition of microgravity, such as in orbit above Earth's stratosphere. In such a condition of microgravity, one can form a bubble of water in midair, and by introducing perturbations to this water bubble, one may model the progression of a wave of entropy across its surface as it passes back and forth from the point of contact to the opposite side and so forth in near perpetuity. Another experiment using fluid thermodynamics in microgravity involves introducing an Alka-Seltzer tablet into such a water bubble and considering how it forms a layer of smaller bubbles around a single large central bubble until even this central bubble pops. Such a structure may be seen as a model for a local universe surrounded by baby universes inside a layer of hyperspace. In all these experiments, entropy is artificially introduced and not naturally innate to the media, and in all of them also, there is a finite capacity of volume defining the limitations of the experiment, and thus rendering its expressions of entropy only symbolic at best. What is the significance of scalar waves in understanding the relationship between consciousness and electromagnetic fields? In physics, a scalar is simply any force with a bipolar metric, such as room temperature, measured as either hot or cold on a thermometer, or the opposite poles of a magnet that invisibly either repel or attract nearby iron filings. In the field of vibratory wave mechanics, however, the term scalar takes on an additional meaning. Here it refers to a particular harmonic effect that occurs when two overlapping broadcast frequencies pair to one another, such that it creates a standing wave state between them. A standing wave state can be demonstrated with a string tied up at one end. Introducing a wave into this string by moving the free end rapidly up and down, one may observe this wave returns to its source after bouncing off the stabilized location at the opposite end of the string. In a standing wave state, there is nothing to interfere with this wave continuing to pass back and forth from one end of the string to the other ad infinitum. Now, if one is broadcasting a regular pulsed signal, such as, say, a 110 Hz frequency pure tone, in one direction, and another regular pulsed signal, say 111 Hz, in the direction facing opposite the first, the result of their overlapping between them will be a regular standing wave state at 1 Hz frequency. In all such cases, the scalar wave formed by crossing two different frequencies will be comprised of the difference between them. Likewise, a scalar wave formed by crossing two identical frequencies will be comprised of the addition of them both. Thus, one signal of 10 Hz magnified by a second signal of 10 Hz will simply create a scalar wave field between them of 20 Hz. Modernly, these sort of Hertz frequencies are used in binaural beats for brainwave entrainment. In this process, a person has on earphones that each pulse a different Hertz pure tone, such that the brain, directly in between these sources, is bombarded with different frequencies from different sides, creating a standing wave state of scalar brain waves inside the recipient's frontal lobes. Because actual brain waves are of very low Hertz frequencies, ranging from 0.5 Hertz delta waves to 30 to 100 Hertz gamma waves, it is possible to produce these frequencies by combining pure tones within the range audible to the human ear, from 20 to 20,000 Hertz. In essence, such methods are harmless, but when combined with subliminal suggestions while in an induced hypnagogic trance state, the same models may be weaponized and prove risky. Therefore, there is a fine line between scalar waves in electromagnetic fields and consciousness that may be psychologically dangerous to explore. How does the concept of dimensional relativity reinterpret Einstein's theories of space and time? Dimensional relativity does not reinterpret Einstein's concepts of space-time and matter-energy relativity, but expands on them. For example, dimensional relativity examines dimensionality holographically, with each larger dimension having an effect on each lower dimension and not the reverse, similar to the relationship of a 3D object casting a 2D shadow. Therefore, in this context, we would say Einstein's 4D metric for spacetime holographically projects the effect of time onto three-dimensional space and is itself, in turn, merely a 4D hypershape seen by the 5D light of hyperspace tachyons. Dimensional relativity also depends on many of the same rules for geometry and physics that define Einstein's relativities. For only one example, the conservation of angular momentum occurs between dimensions as well. What is the relationship between tachyon radiation and the formation of wormholes in the author's cosmological model? For one thing, tachyons do not radiate, they emanate. This distinction may seem trivial, yet it is essential to understanding the distinct difference between all other forms of energy on the electromagnetic spectrum below light speed and tachyons as the sole form of illumination at velocities above light speed. While all lesser forms of energy radiate, tachyons emanate. Photons, for example, are a real particle or boson, and this means that a continuously flowing stream of them is required to propagate a light ray in outer space or in the laboratory. So, a ray of light is actually a series of photons in a sustained beam, emitted from a constant, such as a star, or controllable, like a bulb, light source. This is the nature of all radiation, whether photons or gamma rays, etc., that it has a continuous source and that it is comprised of discrete parcels of data called quanta. Compared to radiation as a curvilinear wavelength, emanation is a co-circumferential series of ripples along a spherical wave front. Again, this distinction may seem subtle, but it is this difference between photon radiation and tachyon emanation that establishes the former as entropic decay and the latter as light without heat. The best way to realize the meaning of tachyon emanation, as opposed to photon radiation, is to compare and contrast the shapes and natures of these forces' quanta. A photon is essentially spherical, insofar as it possesses spin in three directions of motion. One, around its equator between its twin poles. Two, precessional wobble or axial tilt as the actual poles wander rather than maintaining a stationary location. And finally, three, past vector and future trajectory motion or spin as a sinusoidal wavelength. A tachyon, on the other hand, is essentially a torus. It possesses spin in four directions of motion, 1 through 3 being the same as the combined motions of the sphere, and 4 involution, the counter rotation of the torus radii into and out of the centroid point between them. In involution, the twin opposite sides of the tube torus work like interlocking gears, such that while one side is rotating clockwise, the opposite side is rotating counterclockwise. Because these two components inside the single toroidal-shaped tachyon both rotate in opposite directions to each other, this shape conserves interior spin and counterspin to zero. However, as mentioned, emanation also treats this sort of toroidal quantum similarly to a real particle photon, in that the tachyon also can have polar equatorial or dipolar spin, axial tilt or precessional spin, and projected trajectory or past vector spin, and still express its own unique form of counter-rotational or involutional spin as well. So, taken in isolation, a singular tachyon will simply sit and involute for perpetuity, canceling out its spin and counterspin, but it will never move about in any other directions unless acted upon by exterior forces and caused to do so. At this point, if the equatorial edge of one tachyon is aimed at the polar hole of another, this process may be used to expand this tachyon's polar hole into a wormhole. How does the book's depiction of the multiverse as a nested structure of baby universes impact interpretations of the Big Bang Theory? Inside our current local universe, when a black hole's core gravitational singularity initially takes on enough mass to form its own baby universe inside itself, the event beginning this baby universe is a miniature version of the same Big Bang that occurred at the beginning of our own local universe. Thus, likewise, our own local universe formed in a Big Bang that itself arguably occurred within a larger black hole's core gravitational singularity inside a parent cosmos. We can, of course, attach measurements to all these concepts, but we cannot expect reality to exactly conform to such, considering that our measurements are axiomatic rules and idealized laws, whereas reality is a situation where conditions are constantly changing and reliable, let alone lasting, observations are difficult to obtain. So, for theory's sake, let us posit the local universe is some 13.79 billion years old and has a presently observable diameter of at least 93 billion light years. So we can calculate the average rate of expansion for the local universe as being approximately 6.74 light years of expansion per each year of universal age. Now, if we take 4D space-time as if it were a sphere, we could posit a layer of hyperspace surrounding the outside of it that would have a definite ratio to the size scale of the local universe. We can even, using the squared circle method of deducing a torus from a sphere, by adding a layer at a distance of x times the square root of 2 minus x away from the centroid point of that sphere, arrive at a predicted depth and distance for this layer of 5D hyperspace surrounding the local 4D spacetime continuum. In the case of our local universe having a visible diameter of 93 billion light years, this implies hyperspace is an invisible toroidal ring extending some 19.261 billion light years beyond and all around this as well. This, in turn, gives us a rough calculation for the diameter of the combined local universe and hyperspace around it of some 131.522 billion light years, or the diagonal of a square, with side lengths equal to the visible diameter of the local universe. Of course, these observations depend entirely on modern equipment, and such is always being improved upon to make more exact observations and more precise calculations. Therefore, all these numbers may be rendered obsolete by a new scientific study at any time nowadays, and so all this remains merely cosmological speculation. Notably, however, it is the diameter of hyperspace, if such an FTL energy field exists in reality, that determines the maximum size of all baby universes that can bubble up into hyperspace from subspace, and thus occupy some, if not all, of this torus of hyperspace. How does the author's claim that all black holes are connected by an intergalactic web of filaments redefine our understanding of the universe's structure? Each spiral galaxy we see in our present local universe has, at its core, at least one black hole. Each of these individual black holes has white holes at its twin electromagnetic poles, emitting the ratio of Hawking radiation that escapes the black hole in jets of iron gas, propelling ejecta at necessarily faster than light speeds. When two of these black holes' polar white holes align with one another across deep space, both emit a gravitational pulse between them, which leaves behind an ionized nebula, a plasma filament. Just as the deep space voids away from all these galaxies and plasma filaments appear to be expanding, so too are the spaces inside all spiral galaxies decreasing as their stars are pulled into their core black holes. The result of this is that entropy is conserved inside these galaxies by gravity, but that beyond these small bastions of light, in the otherwise vast, dark, empty abyss of outer space, the distances between these shrinking galaxies likewise has to expand in order to counterbalance the conservation of entropy inside these galaxies. So, aside from the plain observation that space-time may be expanding between galaxies, and yet may be also shrinking inside of galaxies at the same time, the realization of the intergalactic plasma filaments as a fundamental constant of universal expansion, essentially like Buckminster Fuller's geodesic and tensegrity structures, seems to offer little new or different insight into ontological astrophysics than is already known and popularly accepted. What are the philosophical implications of subspace being described as a realm of manifestation, and how does it intersect with ancient magical traditions? The double entendre of the word manifestation, whereby it may be either a verb or noun, skirts the razor's edge when it comes to the philosophical implications of this term in describing all our mutually shared consensus reality as being co-created, at least in some small part, between both mass and mind. Pardon me. Just as mass comprises all matter energy, but there is more invisible energy in the local universe than there is visible matter, so it is thought the mind can harness this energy over matter and use it to the result of making matter out of raw energy, or, in short, manifesting matter, ex nihilo, or seemingly from nothing. The mind, defined in this case as merely a localization of this otherwise non-local, universal energy field, is thought to be able to use the living brain to project neural engram shapes outside the skull to the end of causing a microscopic quantum scale effect on their surrounding environments. This mental projection, via creative visualization, has the intended goal of inducing operant observer effect onto the surrounding environment's quantum scale uncertainties, even in the absence of one's direct observation, and thus causing a wave function collapse from energetic superposition into a given material certainty. The goal of most ancient magical traditions is, put simply, the attainment or regaining of this condition of mind over matter. In its most modern scientific terminology, magic may be defined bluntly as the art and science of causing change to occur in one's exterior environment in accordance with one's inner will. In spite of all the requisite tools implied as needed to bring about any one of the many and various given magical changes to one's environment one may imagine, such as the right tools, a skillet, eggs, etc., for the magical act of making an omelet, for example. This entire process boils down to basic mind over matter. As I've said before also, magic is just telekinetic manifestation with extra steps. While ritual magic goes around the two legs to connect point A, mental energy, to point C, base matter, by way of point B, the tools of ritual magic itself. Telekinetic mental manifestation takes the hypotenuse and connects A, the mind, directly to C, the matter. Just so, one may collect all the magical tools they want and still not manifest any outcome. Not that there's anything wrong with that either. The tokens of the craft, including sigils and lamens, amulets and talismans, inscribed wands and athames, crystal balls and dowsing rods, all sorts of robes, let alone the various different books, all are worth collecting, even if one is not a practitioner of actual ritual magic oneself. How does the book synthesize metaphysical concepts like the Akashic Records with physical theories like quantum foam? The concept of the Akashic Records is considered metaphysical here only because it is apparently intangible and immaterial, while the concept of the quantum foam is considered a physical theory here only because it is considered substantive and even if, as of yet only indirectly, observable. The concept of quantum foam deals with the results of a certain laboratory experiment, bringing together two flat metal plates to within less than a micron of distance from one another. The apparent findings of this lab test were that subquantum scale perturbations, resembling bubbles, still occurred in the gap, even when it was so narrow that no quanta should have been able to permeate therein. One possible application for the findings regarding the quantum foam could be in explaining the long puzzling Brownian motion in all scale particulates that causes them to fluctuate and move as though perturbed by an invisible force, even in the apparent absence of any such external force acting on them. I first read about the premise of quantum foam in a work called Fuzzy Logic, but later came across the same premise in a work on zero-point energy. I certainly cannot recreate the parameters of the experiment described in these sources to determine for myself the, at least theoretical, existence of quantum foam. So, to this extent, quantum foam remains no more or less mysterious and metaphysical to me than the Akashic Records may seem to most as well. The premise of the Akashic Records dates back at least to H.P. Blavatsky, 1831 to 1891, and her idea of Akasha, the Sanskrit term for ether, as being something like an indestructible force field of pure potential energy. It remained for later theosophical authors, C.W. Leadbeater, Alice Bailey, anthroposophist anthroposophist Rudolf Steiner, and sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce to tie this premise of a universal energy field, the acacia, directly to the idea of an immutable, permanent, and everlasting record of all possible events from the beginning until the end of time that may be accessed by clairvoyance, such as Steiner and Cayce themselves claimed to be. Of course, the apparent failings in many cases to make accurate clairvoyant predictions about the near future or even the ancient past by relying solely on this premise of an Akashic record should not necessarily be taken to discredit or debunk the premise of an Akashic record itself. Indeed, the acacia as ether energy itself may be real, even if it does not store any record of all our predetermined emotions, thoughts, and deeds, as claimed by the later theosophists. Indeed, it remains possible that this akashic energy field and the quantum foam are one and the same phenomenon, although this premise would likely be categorized by modern researchers as extremely speculative. And so that constitutes episode 25 of the Pythagorean Order of Death podcast. Those were questions asked to me at my own prompting by ChatGPT, the chatbot, about my 2003 Metaphysician's Desk Reference, the MPDR. And I hope you enjoyed learning the answers to those questions and so forth as much as I enjoyed answering them. Uh, I suppose that's it for this episode. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, night, evening, and dawn, as whatever time it may be that you happen to watch or listen to this. And for now, that's all. Aloha and peace.